Hey everybody, welcome to another video. I'm Sanjita, and today we're going to be talking about early to mid-game solo threats for Grand Arena specifically, starting with Mr. Wampa, the most obvious selection for a big solo threat. He has an Omicron completely centered around being a solo character, and he has no tags, which is kind of funny. But you can use him to counter Iden Versio, General Grievous, especially Rebels, because he has extra damage against Rebels somewhere in his kit. But Rebels other than the CLS squad, they're going to take him out with their irresistible stuns and big damage, tenacity down. He can solo Mon Mothma if it's not the perfect comp. Sana Staros, depending on what they have. Sana with Hondo, probably not going to work, but again, this is early to mid game. He can take out a Trench Separatist team, probably not going to see that early game, and he can take out Ewoks pretty easily. So what can he not take out? I mean, there's a lot of bigger teams that he can take out. His biggest enemy is Tenacity Down, stuns, and ability blocks. If you can stun him, ability block him with Tenacity Down, you're going to stop him dead in his tracks, and Daze is another big deal. What makes him such a big solo threat is mainly the Omicron, but some of his normal unique come into play too. But he gets tons of extra stats, mainly tenacity, survivability, and offense, which is pretty much most of what you want. And he has irresistible dots that go on the enemy. Whenever he's damaged by an attack, he inflicts 2 stacks for 3 turns, which can't be evaded or resisted. And his stats spike with those dots. So he gets an extra 10% counter chance, 5% health steal, and 5% offense for each damage over time on each enemy. That's why sometimes in 5v5 he can be even more powerful than in 3v3. He gets tons of extra defense, health protection, offense, doubled if it's only one enemy, which you don't usually see a ton. And his tenacity stacks out of control, plus 30% every time he takes damage, and there's no cap. So eventually he is just immune to debuffs. But why he hates ability block is you really need to spam this special as much as you can, because he gains 40% offense stacking, again, no limit. So the more he uses it, the more he's going to ramp up and be able to take out even the toughest of foes, unless he's ability block. That's why with the current Datacron set, again, not a big concern for early to mid game, he can't take on Sith as well as he might otherwise, especially Sith Eternal, because he's going to be ability blocked permanently and never going to ramp any damage. But he also gains 15% turn meter for each defeated ally and each active enemy, so mainly just the enemies there. He's going to get tons of turn meter. In 5v5, he's going to get 75% turn meter there. He's especially dangerous against Rebels. I forget where it is in the kit. It might be in the basic. Oh, this has 100% offense against Rebel targets. That's why against the Sana team, not Sana herself, but the whole team, in Mon Mothma, he's very dangerous. He also has the AoE Daze, which is going to shut down a lot of swarm attack teams. He's not good versus Geos because they have his Banes. They have Tenacity Down and ability blocks, so don't try it on them. But Mon Mothma, he can shut down the mass swarms, at least for a little bit. So Wampa, we're not doing this in a ranking order, but he is probably the best solo threat out there, and you can start making use of him even at lower gear, like gear 10 or gear 11, which right away, that seems like really high gear if you're a brand new player. But once you're at the point where you unlock him, you can start making use of him very quickly. So give him the Zeta and the Omicron, and then when you can, give him his second Zeta too, because the healing immunity does help, but it is kind of optional. So yeah, number 1, starting with Wampa. Next up, we got another obvious one, Savage Opress. Unlike Wampa, he is great in all kinds of lineups. He doesn't have to be a solo threat. He's not limited by his kit that way, but he is a good solo threat, especially in the early game. If you can get him just to a decent amount of survivability, decent amount of health, he can take out General Grievous if you're built well enough, Shakti clones, Admiral Akbar, First Order, Iden Versio, Mon Mothma. A lot of those you might want to focus on just 3v3 for, but some of them you can take out in 5v5 as well. He is not as afraid of debuffs as Wampa. He's just afraid of big damage. So he just cleanses himself all the time. At the end of his turn, he dispels all debuffs on a random Sith ally and gains the debuffs return, but or no, what's actually dispelling him is when he's critically hit, and he gets vulnerable inflicted on him when he has resilient defense. So it's kind of, you want the crit to happen, and he stacks his offense and health steal. So that's why you want high health on him. He doesn't have a massive health pool. It's just he recovers the health super quickly. I mean, he does have a high health pool. He gets 50% max health. So a mine there, that's over 100,000. But he's just afraid of really big damage, which isn't that common. If you get a bunch of if you face a team with a bunch of big damage, that's going to take you out, and that's why he's limited to still a lot of the Tiki-Tac, Mass Swarm, not really super offense-heavy teams, but he is better in a team himself. However, early game, still going to take out a lot of stuff, like the teams I mentioned. Super durable with extra defense for his Brazilian defense. Stacks offense, not as high as Wampa, maxes out 160%, but he is a big threat. And then when enemies get below half health, if they're in the yellow, he can deal a massive damage blow, which is 100,000, which is a huge reason why he is more of a threat in the early to mid game. So when you're dealing with super relic heavy, super durable teams in the late game, 100,000 damage might not cut it, but in the early game, that's pretty much going to knock anyone out unless you're at higher relics. So that's why he is such a big solo threat. Next one might be a bit of a surprise to people, and he's not super widely useful as a solo threat, but he's mainly useful when you're punching down in Grand Arena and trying to just be as efficient with banners as possible. So this is a throwback to my early free-to-play days back in 2019 when Grand Arena was in the old system. I like to do as many solo attacks as I could, and if there was a team that was rather weak, I would just take Anakin in because he does have a leadership. He gives himself some extra offense and crit damage. 30% offense and 20% crit damage is nothing too shabby. So he gets a big boost just on his own. And then as long as you have a speed advantage and there's a pretty flimsy team on the other side, you can almost wipe them all out with an AoE. This is not widely useful. It's not going to come in handy in a big pinch, but it is going to come in handy if you need to be efficient on banners, especially in 3v3. In 5v5, you got to be really selective. You got to know how much damage he usually does on the AoE. Look at the health and protection pool of the enemy team. Make sure they're all or most under that. If he has one or two characters left after that, he can do fine. And he gets great banners too because he gives himself protection up on this attack. So he's not going to lose banners either. So that is definitely a potential for 68 or 69 banners in 5v5. However, in 3v3, it's a little bit more safe to try him as a solo threat. But again, only for early game and only when you're punching down. Moving back to another classic, we have Enfys Nest, and everyone kind of knows from back in the day she was a solo machine. Nowadays, I don't get to use her as a solo very often. I did last year, even in Kyber 1, I got to use her to solo in 3v3. A Maul team, it was Maul, Canderous, and Droideka, and the way they work, they're never going to dent her because she stacks 40% bonus protection, and then an additional 40% on top of that, so it's going to be 40%, 80%, 120%, 160% until it's a ridiculous amount of protection every time she's damaged. And the way that team works, she can exploit it very much. But I think people know that now. They don't set Droideka with Maul anymore. Droideka is just a ploy to get a lot of extra speed. However, this is early to mid-game counters, and you're not going to see Maul too often in early mid-game. The main way you want to mod her either for high health or high tenacity. If you're going for a solo threat, you definitely want a lot of tenacity. But for me, I just mod her for health because she's a throw-in for teams to prevent like CLS counters or Terminator Train counters on a team. But where you want to take her up against, you want to take her up against high buff teams or buff heavy teams that they get a lot of buffs. Teams that don't have massive damage on their own, but rely on a lot of little hits. The best and the classic counter that she can take care of is a Padme team. It's very difficult to pull off. You need very built-up nests, so I wouldn't recommend it. But the way that works is she gains 2%, not a high number, 2% crit damage and health steal whenever an enemy loses a buff or debuff, and her basic can dispel defensive buffs, which is protection up. I don't think protection up is listed here. Defensive buffs include defense, health, protection, evasion, and tenacity. Okay, so they just listed weird, as well as taunt, stealth, foresight, healing over time, and crit immunity. For teams that have a lot of these buffs, she's going to be able to ramp up her damage, so you don't need to mod her specifically for offense, but if you want to take her as a solo threat, give her just a little bit. Although it's hard to balance. Tenacity, health, offense, there's a lot of stuff to do. She can take out sortie teams, though, I think at 5v5 or 3v3, as long as they don't have massive damage on the team. Shock T is another good target. but you kind of want to punch down. She takes out Ewoks really well. She does have the AoE Daze and gains turn meter from it. Her biggest enemy is also Tenacity down and Daze mainly. I mean, Stun too, but Daze, she really hates it because she does most of her damage through counterattacks. You don't care too much about her speed because she has 80% counter chance. She can't ignore taunt during her turn too, which is very useful. So you got to be selective now, but she's definitely a big solo threat in the early game. Just make sure she has decent speed and health and tenacity. Next one is a lesser used, lesser thought of solo threat, and I'm going to admit it's mainly for 3v3. So Han Solo is of course amazing with his best friend Chewie and Commander Luke, or under Dash Rendar lead. But in the early game, if you have him built up decently well, even just gear 12, as long as you have enough damage and you have a good amount of speed and you outspeed the other team, you can take 3 characters out pretty easily without him even getting touched. So he's going to start the battle with his shooting first, and he's going to do his basic. As long as they're flimsy enough, and again, this is another punch down one like Jedi Knight Anakin, he's going to take him out with his basic. Then if he's faster than all of them, he's going to get to go first. Use Deadeye, and as long as he has full counter chance, it's easy to get him to 100% counter chance because he has 20% bonus here, and he has very high base crit chance anyway. Outside of relics, it might be a little bit more difficult, but where I have him relic 8, he has like 100% even without that bonus. So it's pretty easy to get to 100% crit chance on him. He's going to get 100% turn meter, take someone out, and get to use the basic again. So again, I don't know exactly who you want to take out with this, but it's like for punching down on teams and teams that don't have the initiative to go first like he does. Next, we got another kind of situational one. It's Fennec Shand. When she came out, it was always theorized that she'd be a solo threat. In reality, hasn't come into play a lot at the higher end, but at a lower level, if you build her up, so I'm thinking more like if you went for Java early as one of your first GLs, you can use her. She's R8, and you can use her to take out some teams from your peers that might not have all their teams relicked up. But what makes her so threatening as a solo act is her leadership gives her 100% defense, max health, max protection, and offense, which are reduced for each ally she has at the start of the battle. So, in all honesty, it is safer to take her with a buddy or something in 5v5. In 3v3, I think it's a little bit safer. That's a lot of extra stats, so she's going to be very durable, but there's not really any benefit that's tenacity related, so you want to avoid high debuff teams that can incapacitate her. She's not really afraid of ability block because her basic is so strong, but like stun or daze or offense down, things like that, defense down, stuff that's going to make her vulnerable. And it's also going to be hard for her to get her contract off because she needs a lot of debuffs to expire. So it's another kind of punch down one, but she's good against Ewoks, Retro Phoenix without Captain Rex. I even saw a BAM team lose in 5v5 in Kyber 1 in the stats and the data. So it definitely can work, but it's all about this basic. She can take out, pick apart the weakest at a time, and then if you mod her for enough protection and health, she's going to withstand the damage. She doesn't have a lot of recovery, so you might want to go for health, because she does have some health steal. Mod her for good durability and good offense, and you might be able to pick apart some stragglers. Okay, enough of the punching down solo acts. Our next one is Malak. And is he early game? No, not really. I don't think you can argue that. But he definitely is mid game, and I'd argue that. He is now one of the cheaper legendaries to unlock, because all the newer ones require a lot of relics. He just requires gear 12 or less, but it is a lot of characters. So he is definitely difficult to unlock, but even at 5 stars, even before you finish him off with all that get 1 currency, he is a great solo threat. It all comes down to his uniques mainly. He takes reduced damage from like dots, so he's not afraid of dots or drain life, anything that's based on max health. And he becomes more resilient the lower his health is, and it's all health. He loses all his protection and it's all health. He gains 35% crit avoidance, health steal, tenacity, and defense when he's less than 75%, and then double it again at 50%, tripled at 25%. So that adds up to a really high amount of survivability, over 100% crit avoidance when he's very low, and that defense really adds up. And he can just replenish his life force with this, taking 100% of the enemy's health. So you don't even really need to worry about damage with him, because that's your main killer. And each time you do it, you get Dark Infusion, which spikes your offense. So up to an extra 105% offense. The biggest thing you counter with him is Padme. Although you want to avoid Mace. If there's Mace Windu in the lineup, you want to avoid that. And it's mainly a 3v3 thing. And if you are using him as a solo threat, for me, I have him at like max protection, but you need him with a lot of tenacity if you're doing solo threats. I got very frustrated early on in my YouTube days last year because I tried to solo Padme with him, and I did not have a tenacity set on him. I did not have a tenacity overall build, and I didn't realize that at the time, but I got stun locked forever. So you really need that extra tenacity, and he can take out teams that don't incapacitate him, like Shaak Ti, Hux in 3v3, Son of Staros, General Grievous, some comps in 3v3, mainly like the ones without B1. Swordy he can take out in some cases. Sometimes he can take out Iron Versio teams, and then in 3v3 sometimes Dash Rendar, and maybe even Cere Junda. I haven't even tested it out much myself, but I have seen it in the data. It's a very high win rate on a very small sample size. So early game, it's going to work even better for you if that's working in Kyber 1. And also, he's fearing anyone that critically hits him, so effectively, you get they only get like 1 turn out of every 2. If they're critically hitting him or inflicting damage over time on him, they're going to be stopped in their tracks. So he is just a classic, and he's an overpowered character. He's a top 10 character in this game. He used to be like top 1 or top 2. But he is going to solo some stuff for you. As soon as you unlock him, get him to like year 10 or year 11 and start wrecking people's faces. And last but certainly not least, we have a day 1 original character, a classic, Darth Vader, who has been reworked a couple times, but thanks to those reworks, he is a solo threat. For early and mid game, mainly it's for Geonosians. You need things to line up perfectly though for you to take out Geonosians. If they start getting turns, you're pretty much done. You need to be faster than them. You need to have the Merciless Massacre Zeta. You need to have the lead Zeta. I don't think you need the unique Zeta, but you need good damage on him. You do need him to be faster than the enemy team, pretty much any of them, because if any of them go, they're going to mass swarm. We're thinking 5v5. They're going to mass swarm, put tenacity down and ability block on you, and you won't be able to get into Merciless Massacre. However, in Merciless Massacre, you want to do Force Crush, take out Geobrute Alpha if it's flimsy enough. So this isn't something you want to use against like a fully relic Geonosian team. You want to use it against Gear 11, maybe Gear 12 if you have decent relics on Vader. But that's not too much of a stretch because Vader is a great candidate for your first relic or one of your early relics at the least. He can also take out some other stuff like OG Phoenix, Ewoks, Admiral Akbar, but it really has to be kind of punching down at that point. So mainly he is a Geonosian solo threat, but you can get creative with him too. I'd say he's probably better than like Han's Anakin as a solo threat, and probably Fennec. I don't know if he's better than Han Solo in 3v3. Han Solo's, he can make things work pretty well if you haven't built up pretty well. But Darth Vader, definitely not someone to overlook when you're trying to solo. However, it is safer just to bring in some buddies, like a pre-taunting tank, and either Moff Gideon or Thrawn or something. But the threat is there. So that's it for this video on early to mid-game solo threats. Let me know if there are any that you think I have left out, because it's been a while since I was an early or mid-game player. Some of this is just theory in my head, so I'd love to hear from you. Don't forget to like and sub if you haven't already. Hope you enjoyed, hope you learned something, and I'll see you guys later.